Welcome to the School of Love, the place where miracles are normal. Hello and welcome to the School of Love, the place where we learn practical tools based on scientific research and our own experiences towards improving ourselves, living life to its fullest, and contributing to the best of our abilities to the world around us. I am Dr. Maria Grajdian, and I am a professor of media studies and anthropology at Hiroshima University. In my free time, I am doing my best to guide you in building up a life of contentment, joy, and fulfillment while applying lessons learned in school to overcome the difficulties, challenges, and insecurities of the real world. This video brings into foreground the topos of King Arthur and its durability throughout the ages, in parallel with its recent dissemination outside the Western geographical space. Dove Attias and François Choucouet's La Légende du Roi Arthur from 2015 was staged as The Legend of King Arthur in 2016 by the hugely popular all-female musical theater company Takarazuka Revue in Japan. The comparative analysis focuses on issues of cross-cultural visions of masculinity while taking into account concepts of knighthood and the way of the warrior, or in Japanese Bushido, as well as contemporaneous interpretations of the mid-16th century vir Modestus, translated from Latin as a man of moderation, on the quest for healthy paradigms of gender in late modernity, and their representation as well as reinforcement in phenomena of mass entertainment. But now, first things first, that is to disclaimers, two very important disclaimers. The first disclaimer serves to strongly emphasize the fact that this YouTube channel, The School of Love, is not part of my educational and research activities at Hiroshima University. It is nonetheless part of my privilege, joy, and sense of duty to propagate and implement knowledge, information, as well as motivation and inspiration outside the limited framework of academic endeavor. Together, we can build up a better tomorrow for as many of us as possible. The second disclaimer relates to the fact that I am a trained musician and musicologist, not a psychologist, therapist, or counselor. The ideas I am sharing in my videos reflect my deep-going preoccupation with life, my own life and other people's lives, and express the results of my experiences, research, and, for better or for worse, my failures, and my recovery from those failures, recovery which is still ongoing. The ideas expressed in the videos on this channel named The School of Love cannot and may not and must not replace the consultation with specialists in whichever areas of your life you might have questions or you might struggle with. If you are new to the channel, at this moment I would like to ask you to please consider subscribing, sharing, liking, commenting. Thank you very, very much. This helps us not only with that mysterious algorithm which seems to dominate the YouTube galaxy, but also with contributing to the expansion of the community of humans doing their best to impact positively the world and those around them by discovering their authentic selves and living life wholeheartedly. Thanks again. And now back to the real topic of this video, which is King Arthur, or better said, the legend of King Arthur and its representation in mass media. Regarded as one of the most important epic stories in the European geographical space, the Arthurian legend has continuously and repeatedly fascinated creators of most various backgrounds, and with a vast diversity of expression modes throughout the centuries, resulting in its presence in almost all representation media, from novels to movies, cartoons to theatrical performances, comics to poems. This video scrutinizes critically the proliferation and dissemination of the King Arthur topos in Asia, with a more specific spotlight on Japan. The migration of the King Arthur topic from Europe towards Asia occurred through Japan in recent years, as it has often been the case with Western artifacts. The medium for this import and transfer was the extremely popular all-female musical theater Takarazuka Revue, founded in 1914, with its performance The Legend of King Arthur, or in Japanese Aasa o Densetsu, by Moon Troupe, starring Tamaki Ryu as Arthur, as King Arthur, King of Camelot, and Manaki Reika as Guinevere, Arthur's wife, the queen, from late 2016 at Bunkyo Civic Hall in Tokyo and at Umeda Art Theater Drama City in Osaka as well in October 2016. Takarazuka Revue's The Legend of King Arthur was the Japanese language translation of Dove Attias and François Chouquet's French language musical comedy La Légende du Roi Arthur, world premiered on 17 September 2015 at Palais des Congrès de Paris in France capital, with Florent Mott as King Arthur, Camille Lou as Guinevere, Charlie Boisseau as Lancelot du Lac, David Alexis as Merlin, Zoho as Morgan Le Fay, and Fabien Icardona as Maléjean. At the center of the social culture phenomenon embodied by Takarazuka Revue stays otokoyaku, that is, female impersonators of male roles, a highly ambivalent construction combining Western physical allures with Japanese inner qualities and exemplifying once again the powerfully famous as well as infamous hybrid identity painstakingly epitomized in the slogan Wakonyosai, translated usually as Japanese roots or Japanese spirit and Western technology and knowledge. The basis and crux of Japanese modernity initiated in 1868 with the so-called Meiji Restoration. Particularly such concepts as justice and honor find their ideological interpretation in domestic cultural structures in Japan, as they are perceived as correspondences to the century-old codex of the Bushido, or the way of the warrior, which constituted the behavior foundation for the members of the samurai class in pre-modern Japan until 1868. The existence of a knight culture constructed around Christian values by the middle of the first millennium highlights in the perception of Japanese audiences the European focus on existential righteousness and individual self-awareness, deeply associated with progress, continuity, and straightforwardness. Based on ethnographic analysis and hermeneutic interpretation, this video strives for a cross-cultural embedding of the King Arthur narrative within the broader context of ongoing quests for values and orientation, mercilessly challenged by globalization on the background of the perennial need of the human being for belonging, acceptance, and appreciation. To this outcome, I proceed in 3 steps. Firstly, I analyze the 2 paradigms of masculinity based on the culture of the knight in the West and on the ideology of the samurai in Japan, with particular focus on the tremendous pressure innate to the depiction of the historical proliferation of the Giri ninja concatenation, that is, the stress ratio between social obligations and personal emotions, prevalent in Japanese pre-modern works of art, as well as its tragic interpretation as historically negotiable concepts. Secondly, I delve into the mechanisms of the original musical play from France and performance, as well as its focus on the human drama rather than the values intrinsically associated with the legend. Thirdly, I discuss the return to the hierarchy of ethical principles embodied in Arthur's character as a masculinity paradigm and a compositum of the Western knight and the Japanese samurai. His vulnerable self elucidates the man behind the ruler and transcends the ruler as an abstract concept in instrumentalizing violence and pain as tactics to raise awareness in audiences in relation to the cruelty of historical idealization and reinvention of traditions. Arthur's vulnerable masculinity allows for historical referentiality and national sovereignty, while promoting the wide spectrum of individual choices and personal actualization. It also challenges prevailing ideas of obedience, respect, and reliability. In the conclusion, I wrap up the necessity to address masculinity, vulnerability, and love as strategies to attain self-reliance and healthy maturity in late modern Japanese society, as well as Takarazuka Revue's role representing it, proactively propagating it, and eventually leading to its implementation on a real-life scale. Methodologically, I draw on more than 20 years of empiric phenomenological fieldwork on Takarazuka Revue, as well as in the slippery domain of Japanese mass media. I observed the multiple layers of the Takarazuka Revue's administration and self-orchestration, such as performance politics, the economic supervision of brand-related consumption, the social culture management of actresses and fandom, including fans and fan communities, as well as the performances themselves and their meta-narrative concatenations. The sources consist of extensive performance attendance, archive research of Japanese documents, and interviews with Japanese producers, Takarazuka Revue actresses, staff, directors, composers, assistants, teachers, etc., as well as with fans, Japanese and Western fans, and other consumers of products of popular culture, domestic and international. This allowed me unexpected insights into the mechanisms of production, consumption, perception, and processing of media phenomena in Japan. Taking into account the fact that the Japanese media industry is extremely vivacious and almost painful in its superficiality, with a calculated momentary impact on audiences, Takarazuka Revue's longevity, with more than 100 years of uninterrupted activity, is a powerful reminder that determination, hard work, and persistence are worthy assets in the hierarchy of human values, although not always forthrightly advertised as such. In representing on stage the larger-than-life stature of the King Arthur, Takarazuka Revue's administrators tackle the complex relationship between ideological concatenations encompassing the samurai, the bushi, this is a warrior, and the Bushido, that is the way of the warrior or the way of the samurai ideology in late modern Japan, and openly question by means of performative disclosure of its validity. Gradually, in the aftermath of the economic implosion at the beginning of the 1990s, the re-evaluation of traditional values represented by the almighty historical figure of the samurai has been occurring within Japanese society, initiated by Studio Ghibli's animation works by mid-1990s and taken over by Takarazuka Revue's live performances since mid-2010s. As to be shown later on, since Takarazuka Revue's performance The Legend of King Arthur at smaller theatrical institutions in Tokyo and in Osaka, instead of the traditional Takarazuka Grand Theater in the city of Takarazuka or Tokyo Takarazuka Theater in Japan's capital as a kind of pilot project, all performances dealing with war, militarization, or revolution focused on the importance of life as the most important asset one possesses and could ever possess. Furthermore, based on audiences and critics' responses to The Legend of King Arthur, since 2019 and the beginning of the new era, Reiwa, in Japan's chronology in the same year, all performances dealing with Edo period, which had lasted between 1603 until 1868, with its fallacies, merits, and failures in promoting the samurai and Bushido as the only possible existential pathways, display critical distance. On the one hand, there is the gradual demystification of Edo period as an era of peace and prosperity during the politics of sakoku, or national segregation, when Japan closed itself completely to the outside world. On the other hand, there is the proactive quest for a synthetic national identity, encompassing a cooperative approach towards life, which Takarazuka Revue intensively, compassionately juxtaposes over the necessity of belonging to an international community, in blatant contrast with the obtrusive attempts to a return to the ideology of Japan first, pursued by present-day Japanese politics and self-conscientiously promoted by means of discursive representation in Japanese mass media. It is a truism to assert that the most powerful men construct, express, and perform their local culture's ideology of masculinity, and that masculinity is negotiated most exhaustively through heroic leadership. On an additional layer, heroism and gender are absorbed by visions of culture mediated, perpetuated, disseminated, implemented, transcended by its stories. Modes of power and gender are inscribed in the stories we tell, sustained by the language we speak, eternalized by the educational patterns we follow. Few heroes dominate their culture as thoroughly as does King Arthur. From the Dark Ages until today, from England throughout Europe and America, and recently in Asia, most particularly observed in the realms of cinema, computer games, and science fiction literature, King Arthur is arguably the secular hero of medieval and post-medieval Western civilization. An in-depth analysis of Arthurian heroic modes offers insights into the stereotypes and problematizes masculinity represented by the popular character. To a remarkable degree, and from its very inception, the rich story stuff of King Arthur subverts the traditional model of warrior masculinity celebrated in the West. One persistent feature of the Arthur figure confirms his subversive status in relation to warrior masculinity. This mask of command first characterized King Arthur as vir modestus, which means in Latin the moderate man or the humble man, as represented in Gildas the Wise's work from mid-6th century, which delivers one non-genealogical characteristic of the Arthurian figure in accordance with conservative interpretations. That figure of Arthur consequently provides one alternative norm of empowered masculinity for post-heroic culture, as Arthur does not serve ends of glory or conquest, but is tied to the exercise of self-defense, preserving his group against the extremity of foreign invasion. This stays in contrast to Achilles or Alexander the Great, to Odysseus or even Charlemagne, for heroes are more commonly evoked for their image of grandeur and excess. In Latin, magnitude animi, or translated in English, grand souls, spirits searching for glory and recognition. Then for the quest and display of modestia, which translates as humility or moderation. This earliest ascription of Arthurian character and actions clung tenaciously to the mainstream image of the hero throughout the Middle Ages. A vir modestus is, first of all, a moderate man. It is crucial to remember that Aristotle defines virtue itself in terms of moderation, that balance of the mean between extremes. For a warrior, qualities of disciplined restraint become the dominant connotations of modestia, which thus represents an antithesis to the glamorous self-parading of figures like Alexander the Great. It is said that leaders are simultaneously projected onto and respond to their cultures by means of simplifying and energizing masks. It seems that the first molded mask of the Arthur figure was one of a vir modestus, so that the originating mask of Arthurian empowerment and masculine identity projects restraint, reticence, and moderation. This comes as an anomaly, even now, as qualities of heroism attributed to a hero as vir modestus, for the Western tradition cherishes mayhem in its heroes, who are largely identified by action, and primarily by violent action. Such a paradigm for life finds its metaphors in struggle and destruction. Life is a battle. Life is a war. In literature, epic poems most fully embody this insight, as the epic genre largely defines a hero by courageous struggles against all overwhelming odds. Since the Iliad, to start with, in which family, city, and culture are devastated in the name of masculine heroism. War and glory are the preoccupations of the traditional Western hero, modestia being therefore rarely associated with heroism, since it connotates self-control and restraint in activity. This vision goes back to the idea that if life is war, courageous action is the dominant value. If life is peace, then control and temperance, usually gendered as feminine, are the dominant virtues. In such a paradigm, its metaphors are located in security and productivity. Since modestia projects qualities of restraint and calm interiority in Western culture, it too has more typically been associated with feminine virtue than with masculine prowess. Though the dominant strand of Western heroism, especially epic heroism, is identified by conquest and reckless valor, the stories of King Arthur are marked by an alternative understanding of power. The traditional cultural bonding of violent aggression with heroic masculinity is unglued in the connection of this vir modestus with heroic achievement. King Arthur is the primary Western hero with whom we associate this priority shifting quality. Throughout the centuries, the traditional and canonical King Arthur character is always to some notable degree the vir modestus, despite varying representation in the medieval story stock, which only briefly and never quite resoundingly remind of a warrior hero. In the dominant discourse of the Middle Ages, starting with Chrétien de Troyes' 5 Arthurian romances between circa 1170 and 1190, there is an ominous conflict between the King Arthur's insight and his actions, as for him, violence remains morally and politically ambiguous, and he gradually becomes, at his most powerful, a hero whose mask of power is reticence. King Arthur is a consummate quiet man. His authority is never noisy. Even before, since Geoffrey of Monmouth's authoritative version, completed around 1138, of the Imperial Arthur, which fundamentally shaped much of the subsequent Arthurian tradition, there is a specific ambivalence and uncertainty about whether force and violence can be justified. The membership of the Round Table typically includes knights from different cultures, and since knighthood, respectively chivalry, claim to be cross-cultural ideals, the Arthurian tradition is rendered permanently uneasy with xenophobic forms of crusading propaganda. Arthurian stories show in themselves little chagrin about employing violence as a means to idolize ends, but the echo of the initial vir modestus haunts and limits the Arthurian core. Arthur is rarely allowed to revel in his military success, as peacemaking and peacekeeping are more appropriate modes of heroic display for this vir modestus. Even in Sir Thomas Malory's version from 1485, titled Le Mort d'Arthur, originally spelled Le Mort d'Arthur, which is incorrect Middle French for the death of Arthur, Arthur's triumphal movement through Europe is hailed as dynastic restoration rather than conquest. Furthermore, for Malory, the mature Arthur blends traditional feminine with masculine gender roles. He learns and then unlearns his role as a conventional warrior as he fulfills and then transcends the expectations of traditional heroic masculinity. By his own example, he replaces sheerly individual warrior heroism with round table brotherhood and cooperation. Malory's King Arthur is profoundly aware of the Round Table Fellowship as his greatest accomplishment, though he is equally aware of its evanescent and fragile character. On the other hand, it is crucial to keep in mind that the exalted narrative of the samurai as a functional modus operandi in Japan has been inaugurated by Nitobe Inazo's Bushido, the Soul of Japan, from 1904, which reconstructed the way of the warrior, or Bushido, for Western readerships, and, in a curious development of strategic cultural imports, made it strikingly popular among Japanese intellectuals and subsequently among Japanese regular citizens throughout the decades ever since. It also served as a model for the hegemonic masculinity of modern Japan, with essential characteristics such as emotionless endurance, strictly hierarchical unconditional obedience, and low-key to non-existent individuality being transferred into the mental-emotional requirements of the so-called corporate warriors, or Kigyo Senshi, the ubiquitous salaryman or regular employees on lifelong tenure at Japanese companies in post-war Japan. The idealization of the samurai was a process initiated immediately after the samurai class has been dismantled, as a direct consequence of the new political order after 1868, with inevitable broad exaggerations in comparison to the social historical reality of mid-19th century Japan. The appeal and fascination of the samurai have resided in its historically inaccurate perfection, compounded by the ambiguous role the samurai had played by mid-19th century, both as defenders of the old order with its crystallized structures and as forth-bringers of the new order with its scary but necessary changes. Thus, the members of the samurai class had not been the soft-spoken, mild-mannered intellectuals committed to such superior values as loyalty, honor, compassion, but they were often corrupt, lazy aggressors, living off the farmers' hard work, poverty, crushing taxes. They did not join the new order and economic political organization of the country out of sudden decency, idealism, or enthusiasm for modern times and modern values, but out of sheer pragmatism, as most of them clearly understood that clinging on to the past would only mean their own demise, financial ruin, and misery. Furthermore, only approximately 6% of the former samurai participated in the various riots, as most of the members of this social stratum were ready and self-confident enough to face and solve the responsibilities and challenges brought about by modernity. Based on Confucianist ideas adapted to Japan's reality of the early 17th century and developed in accordance with what seemed appropriate by early 20th century, Nitobe proposed a model of the samurai as the ultimate existential paradigm with core concepts such as the preservation of order and harmony, the promotion of the 5 virtues of considerate love, righteousness, awareness, honesty, reciprocity, as well as the golden rule of not harming others and of fulfilling the 3 social obligations of loyalty, respect towards the elderly, fundamental for family and state nation, and politeness, reflected in the 5 basic human interactions between father and son, master and disciple, husband and wife, elder brother and younger brother, older friend and younger friend. Moreover, Bushido circumscribed 8 fundamental virtues: rectitude or justice, righteousness, courage or heroism, benevolence or mercy or compassion, politeness, honesty, honor, loyalty or duty, and character, also understood as self-control, and 3 affiliated virtues such as filial piety, reflected in respect for one's parents, elders, and ancestors, wisdom, which referred to knowledge combined with life experience, and fraternity, which meant the organization into groups of men based on various criteria. Altogether, carried very culturally specific features and required a detailed explanation way beyond the purpose of this current video or analysis. So it's a very complex system, and I'm not going any more deeply into this topic. But as to be shown later on, it is particularly the moderation aspect of King Arthur's character, which was incorporated into the Japanization process in Takarazuka Revue's version of Atiya's and Shuquet's musical play. Takarazuka Revue is an unusually popular all-female musical theater in Japan, a dynamic institution with a strictly stratified corporative structure. Founded by Kobayashi Ichizo, one of the most important entrepreneurs in pre-war Japan, in 1914 as part of an economic political project to expand the northwestern area of Osaka within the rapidly emerging industrialized society, Takarazuka Revue Company developed quickly from the initial small organization of 16 teenage girls who had their first performance at the theater converted from an indoor swimming pool into a building attached to the main hot spring resort, into an increasingly successful enterprise, carrying various denominations throughout the decades. Eventually, it became in 1940 Takarazuka Revue Company, or in Japanese, Takarazuka Kageitan, the name under which it is currently registered. In tandem with Otokoyaku's representation of masculinity on Takarazuka Revue stage and public advertisement, Musumeyaku, which translates literally as daughter role with the subliminal image of maiden, refers to female impersonators of female roles in Takarazuka Revue. Both otokoyaku and musumeyaku are subsumed to the category of actress, while their denomination within the Takarazuka Revue company and its related context is seito or pupil, or Takarazuka or Takaragenno, introduced by the director Shirai Tetsuzo, who compared the cute Takarazuka Revue actresses with the beautiful Parisienne at Moulin Rouge in Paris. Within the extremely strict hierarchy of Takarazuka Revue's educational and performance system, the concept golden combination refers to the otokoyaku-musumeyaku pair, in Takarazuka Revue jargon top stars, at the top of every of the 5 actively performing ensembles. It is important to mention that while the acting staff is exclusively female, the administrative staff is to a great extent male and was exclusively male from Takarazuka Revue's inception until 1999. This clear-cut separation of functions has been playing a fundamental role in Takarazuka Revue's evolution and its preoccupation with staging evolving patterns of social cultural delineation and belonging, as well as its dialectically pragmatic adaptation to the expectations of audiences, while subtly influencing their tastes, preferences, life choices. In addition, an important element in elucidating the role played by the import of the legend of King Arthur as performance and of King Arthur as character in Japan's late modern dynamics of mass media conveyed messages of masculinity, power, and national identity is understanding the role played by the otokoyaku as existential paradigm throughout Japan's tumultuous 20th century, and more particularly in early 21st century. A powerful alternative to the otaku, respectively to the herbivore man or Soushoku Keidanshi phenomenon, regarded as emblematic for the so-called crisis of masculinity in contemporaneous, post-industrialized, service-based nations. In modern Japanese slang, an otaku describes an obsessive fan of different forms of subculture models and fashions. A herbivore man is a soft male youngster with little to no interest in romantic relationships or financial success, resulting from assertiveness, aggression, and/or open display of sexual desires, who instead focuses on more passive activities like hobbies, non-conflictual friendships, and low-key, mostly part-time jobs. Contrary to the established cliché, those described as otaku seem to have once been ambitious boys, nefariously affected by the loss of faith in science and technology since the 1970s. In contrast, herbivore men prefer individualist pastimes to collective involvement and its associated socioeconomic belonging, and distance themselves from the relentless chase of money, status, women, regularly encompassed in the ideology of Gambaru, which translates as a single-minded, goal-oriented pursuit of some ideals commonly imposed by society and family of origin. Takarazuka Revue's otokoyaku presents a credible counter-image to all current relativizing gender and social roles, positions, as well as sexualities and identities. To the disempowered masculinity displayed by otaku and herbivore men, Takarazuka Revue's otokoyaku reacts with romantic empowered masculinity, clinging to classical elements of masculine existence. As an ideal of the new man in female imagination, the otokoyaku ideologically embodies a masculine figure which, on a physical level, collects externally characteristics of male idols from Clark Gable to James Dean and Elvis Presley, such as strong, lean bodies, compact attitudes, strength, and elegance, and possesses internally positive qualities. An otokoyaku is composed, courteous, kind, considerate, faithful, and courageous. This amalgam penetrates Japanese characters as well, from Hikaru Genji of Japan's iconic 11th century novel The Tale of Prince Genji and its various stage productions, or Sakamoto Ryoma, the rebellious samurai gentleman from another performance by Takarazuka Revue from 2006. And the fact that approximately 2/3 of the performances are Western influenced and 1/3 draws on Asian sources is in particular reflected in the costumes and scenery designs, while the characters' inner and outer configuration stays basically unchanged. Their ethnical affiliation and historical contextualization are to be extracted from the plot and the audience's background expectations rather than from the obvious stage representation and public advertisement. An otokoyaku may not simply contain all these characteristics like a statue, though. She must show weakness along the course of her development and must reach the right decision at the right moment, even when this causes pain, according to the centuries-old codex still present in the consciousness of most audiences. In blatant antagonism to the image of the otaku and herbivore man, which is by now omnipresent in Japan and from Japan spreading worldwide in an unstoppable wave of cultural dissemination and appropriation, the otokoyaku version of masculine essence appears as a charismatic individual capable of abnegation and sacrifice, something the predominantly Japanese, predominantly female audiences both yearn and cherish. In importing the legend of King Arthur from France and adapting it to the realities of Japan's mid-2010s, there were three dimensions to be taken into account by Takarazuka Revue's administrators and magnificently solved. Firstly, what might be labeled as nostalgic revisionism. The Japanese ideal of masculinity had been concocted in late Meiji period, which lasted from 1868 until 1912, which barely 100 years after its completion is a half-mythical time, during which the young nation-state patterned upon Western models and its population carried out in record speed the import and implementation of Western fundamental assets of modernity, such as knowledge, technology, and lifestyle. However, with the import of new systems, new rules and regulations emerge, and the social order as well as structure is shaken deeply, without a major overhaul of the fundamental regulations of the previous era. The strictly hierarchical structure of the society with the male individuality in the form of the samurai or of the military ruler of the shogun, at its core being one of them. The end of the shogunate was the end of the world as regular Japanese citizens knew it, and with it, a whole universe of beliefs, ideas, longings ended. In Takarazuka Revue's version of the legend of King Arthur, the character of Arthur encompasses a newly discovered curiosity for life in its magnanimous plurality, enhanced by the lead otokoyaku's humbling enactment, which recognizes the necessity of the disintegration of the old world as a condition for the emergence of the new world, so that, therefore, both are organically integrated in the flux of history. The song Shukumei no Uta, which translates literally as the Song of Fate, which is the translation and adaptation of the French version of Auprès d'un autre, which translates in English next to another man, reflects this process. While the original song referred to Arthur's feelings of pain, disappointment, and despair after figuring out Guinevere's betrayal with Lancelot du Lac, the Japanese version transcends the negative emotions into seeds of growth, compassion for oneself and for others, and individual accountability.
Je plie sous le poids de la douleur tenace qui broie mon âme sans merci. Je prie sans la foi pour que le temps efface cette rage qui ronge mon esprit. Comment ressentir la haine pour un être que l'on aime plus fort que soi? Faut-il jeter dans les flammes tous les mensonges et l'infâme qui font mal, mal, mal? Mon Dieu, faites qu'un jour je lui pardonne. Car c'est elle qui a fait de moi un homme. Je veux croire que c'est de ma faute si ce soir elle dort près d'un autre. Je plie sous le poids de mon armure de glace L'écho de sa voix, comme une morsure vorace, me dévore à l'infini. Comment ressentir de la haine pour un être que l'on aime plus fort que soi? Trouver la force de bannir le passé, les souvenirs qui font mal, mal, mal. Mon Dieu, faites qu'un jour je lui pardonne. Car c'est elle qui a fait de moi un homme. Je veux croire que c'est de ma faute si ce soir elle dort auprès d'un autre. La nuit, le vide et l'absence, l'ennui, le manque et l'oubli. À mes cris répond ton silence. Alors je pleure et je prie. Mon Dieu, faites qu'un jour je lui pardonne. Car c'est elle qui a fait de moi un homme. Mon Dieu, faites qu'un jour je lui pardonne. Car c'est elle qui a fait de moi un homme. Je veux croire que c'est de ma faute si ce soir elle dort auprès d'un autre.
誰一人理解できぬ私の孤独、この痛み耐え続ける、それが己の使命。思たる者に神が与えた試練か、思たる者に神が与えたこの孤独。肩の荷は下ろせない、自由は遥か遠い、それは幻か、王に自由はない、途切れることない心の痛み、誰にも見せずに歩き続ける。これが宿命なのか、歴史を作るため私は強く歩き続ける。
Secondly, what might come across as cultural hierarchization. The inevitable tendency when confronting two or more cultures by means of mediatic representation is to draw comparisons and to elaborate educational lessons delivered by existential messages to consumers, readerships, and audiences. By placing the domineering stardom embodied by the lead otokoyaku in the position of the master turned disciple who learns valuable life skills and eventually finds in the very act of treason a fresh life purpose, Takarazuka Revue's version of the legend of King Arthur turns the scenic act into a huge parable on humility and respect. The mesmerizing, breathtaking dance and fight scenes provided by the members of the Moon Troupe since its inception in 1921, traditionally associated with high-quality group performances, highlighting the entire company's focus on collective excellence emerging from individual excellence, are the result of long hours of focused training, hard work, and perseverance, often culminating in touching, soft, inconspicuous confirmation of intense work ethics and professional discipline. The song Asa o Sanka, which translates literally as the hymn of King Arthur, which is composed by Dov Atiam only for the Japanese version of the musical play, speaks of leadership as a compositum of kindness, sense of responsibility, moderate vision of and for the future, so that the subjects love the leader and follow him out of trust and awe, and not out of fear and lack of alternatives. In this reading of the Arthurian legend, a leader seeks the love, appreciation, respect of those who entrust him with that function, and he has to earn it again and again. Highly idealist, it is a clear return to the vir modestus, the moderate man or the humble man, described by Gildas the Wise by mid-6th century in what is regarded nowadays as the prehistory of the Arthurian legend. A high-caliber man, so stable in his masculinity that he can afford to be gentle and forgiving, in his aspiration for peace and harmony in his kingdom and in the world, despite historical challenges.
エクスカリバーは僕のものだ。黙れ。政権を抜くのにふさわしいのは清らかな魂の持ち主だけだ。愛される王に、そして民を愛する慈悲深き君主に、神が決めた定めなら己の孤独を封印し、民のためこの国のため私は生きよう、それが定め。道は一つ、統治すれど君臨せず世を治める、それが定め。道は一つ、日の光と繁栄を
Thirdly, in cognitive consonance with Manuel Castell's ontological vision of individual identities encapsulating generosity and spiritual enlightenment, the axiological ideal promoted by Takarazuka Revue underscores the re-evaluation of humanity from a competitive undertaking towards a merciful togetherness. Values replace rules, so that when in doubt, life is to be chosen over justice or revenge. This is a lesson acquired by Arthur while perceiving and processing the loss of faith in Guinevere and Lancelot du Lac, and most obvious in the dramatic song Zankokuna Shiuchi, which translates literally as cruel treatment, and which is a translation and adaptation of the French version of Ce que la vie a fait de moi, which translates literally as what life has turned me into, or what life has made out of me. One of the most dramatic numbers of the entire musical play, it is originally sung by Morgane Le Fay, Arthur's half-sister, who pursues an incestuous relationship with him, unbeknownst to him, and who burns with desire to destroy him. In the initial song, Morgan depicts her loneliness and her isolation, as well as the alienating force of hatred. In the Japanese version of the musical play, the song is sung by Arthur at the climax of the narrative line, after Guinevere's infidelity has become undeniable, and Arthur must decide whether to require further proof for the official condemnation, which he eventually does. Hoping against hope, Arthur tries to alleviate his confusion and to find strength in the despair, a blatant contrast to Morgan's stance, who was begging for others' compassion for her toxic behavior due to her painful past. In King Arthur's final act of forgiveness, there is a perceived affirmation that the universal hegemonic masculinity of strict rules bows in respect to the masculinity ideal embodied by the merciful man of the beginning of history, a profound, strong ideal buried in the shadow of its historical dissolution, to be sure, but nevertheless a valid emotional structure to be remembered and acknowledged as such. Finally, the desire to situate oneself as a vulnerable, merciful self within globally dynamic communities of self-aware citizens transpires from deep within the leader Tokoyaku's orchestration of Arthurian masculinity and inoculates itself into the audience's subconscious. Beneath this stylistic cacophony, ideologic inconsistency, and aesthetic contradictions, Takarazuka Revue's new model of a vulnerable, merciful masculinity emerges in the midst of its romantic worlds via the Arthurian model, reinforcing the Takarazian as a Lichtgestalt, an athletic, slender angel of light, à la japonaise, profiled on the background of a rigorous, disciplined lifestyle as the pathway to individual fulfillment, excellence, and supremacy. Dove Attia, born in 1957, is one of the most preeminent names in contemporaneous French entertainment industry. Of French-Tunisian origins, his professional trajectory has proven throughout the decades that long-range vision and flexibility can deliver spectacular results. Most of the performances, music plays, he has produced, composed, script written, etc., stem from famous stories, but are enriched in Attia's version with details which make them emotionally relatable and mentally rewarding for late modern exigent audiences. Rather than being original, complicated stories or pretentious repetitions, Attia's restagings imagine anew the characters and enhance them with unexpected depth while embedding them in compelling narratives which extract their vitality from direct interactions with the real life. In doing so, Attia manages to reinforce the need for human cooperation and warmth by means of recycling masterpieces of world literature. From among Dove Attia's numerous musical plays, Takarazuka Revue Company has taken over, translated into Japanese, and adapted to its own aesthetic ideological structures 4 performances: The Sun King, 1789, The Lovers of Bastille, The Legend of King Arthur, and Mozart. A fifth performance, Casanova, based on the life of the famous 18th century intellectual and womanizer Giacomo Casanova, was commissioned by Takarazuka Revue company to Dovatia. It turned out to be one of Takarazuka Revue's most impactful performances in recent years, alongside with Gerard Prescovich's Napoleon, The Man Who Never Sleeps, Beyond Love and Glory. A specially commissioned musical play by Takarazuka Revue as well. Like Louis XIV, King Arthur, Mozart, both Casanova and Napoleon recall in audiences' memories tales of those who have come to be regarded as great men of history and bring them closer to our days, turn them into relatable humans with fears, insecurities, dreams, pains, and feelings of sadness, isolation, and loneliness. The message is that unless greatness it is counterbalanced by kindness and compassion, it brings about the failure of the individual, regardless of historical achievements. Conversely, regular citizens like Romeo or Ronan Mazurien, the male lead character in 1789, The Lovers of Bastille, receive the chance to become symbols of the human race in its quest for a sustainable lifestyle with more love and mutual acceptance and less competition and hatred. Simultaneously, Takarazuka Revue's increasing promotion of a masculinity of vulnerability and moderation, with compassion, emotional strength, and cognitive flexibility at its very core, proactively displays a peaceful, cooperative approach towards oneself and others in the charismatic, highly stylized figure of the otokoyaku and her impersonation of male characters. Takarazuka Revue's positive orientation towards a masculinity of vulnerability and moderation, its own version of the mid-6th century Vir Modestus, transcends the previously prevalent masculinity of self-sufficiency as staged in its performances on warfare, death, and suffering until mid-2010s, targeted at its predominantly female, predominantly Japanese audiences since mid-1970s. Eventually, Takarazuka Revue's mise-en-scène of Dovatia's The Legend of King Arthur performatively elucidates the mechanisms of instrumentalizing violence, aggression, and pain, as well as their ideological synonymity with Japanese men and the all-too-powerful Japanese ideal of toxic masculinity as a means to sensitize Japanese female audiences towards the evils of emotional mental numbness and disconnection on the backdrop of consumerist complacency and existential indifference, so commonplace in affluent, post-industrialized, service-based nations. Burdened by abysmal and continuously shrinking birth rates, as well as astronomically long life expectancy, present-day Japanese society as a whole sees itself confronted with historically unprecedented challenges. Famously inflexible in facing uncomfortable truth and in adopting the ostrich strategy of rather ignoring problems than courageously addressing them, the clock bomb of socio-economic collapse uninterruptedly reminds Japanese citizens of the necessity to reevaluate their own systems and to start on exploring new avenues of moving towards the future. One first step being the reconsideration of the relationship between collective structures and individual priorities, of the toxic gender rigidity dominating the society, of the intergenerational enmeshment. Once again, Japanese politicians, economists, social engineers, as well as ideologues turned to Western and more specifically French paradigms as the center of enlightenment and modernity in an effort to understand historical cycles in order to grasp its entanglements and to find solutions for the increasingly threatening crises looming ahead. Clearly, the central domination of the almighty stature of the samurai has dissipated. Not only have Takarazuka Revue's performances of past 5 to 7 years gradually focused subliminally and criticized openly rather than glorified the War of the Warrior and its apparently pre-modern fame bound to the legacy of either period, but starting with The Legend of King Arthur from late 2016, a mirroring of the original model of the masculine man as a vir modestus, or a man of moderation, has been initiated. A worldview detailed by a solitary monk by mid-6th century, to which humanity is returning once again. While beholding the stars in deep fascination and hearing their siren-like songs for discovery and closeness, reconsidering the structure and the function of human togetherness instead of competitiveness in light of historical advancement at the beginning of the third millennium is a compelling task as well. Thank you very much for listening to me. This was my part for today. Thank you for joining me today, and I'm looking forward to welcoming you very soon again. Love and peace to you all.